Good afternoon, everybody. We are live for yet another Underdog Fantasy Best Ball stream here on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel. A late scratch today's stream. Brian had something come up, but we have the next best thing available off the bench. We have Moose available to join me on this stream. Moose, how's it going today?
Pretty good. I had a little early golf session this morning and was told to hop on, and so here I am. Glad to be back, Chris.
Moose, it's one of my wife and I took my son out to the park this morning. I got some yard work done around the house after we did that. And I was thinking like, wow, it feels so nice to be like relaxing and being productive on a Sunday. What do I normally do around this time of year on these days? Oh, that's right. It's time for NFL preseason to kick forward. It's time to get my best ball drafts in. Yeah, we only have a few more productive Sundays in front of us until the wintertime, right? So it's funny how this crept up on us. We've almost had long enough to forget exactly how fun it is to watch a football Sunday.
Exactly, yeah. And I won't be able to enjoy the fun of preseason. I will be in Asia for a month or so, and so I'm hoping you all win because I won't be able to play.
Moose, I have faith that you will find some watering hole somewhere over there on your honeymoon where people are super into preseason American football. I did want to ask you, obviously you recently got married. Congratulations. I don't know if our viewers knew that. You're going on your honeymoon to, I believe it's Japan and Korea. Yep. How has, best ball aside, just in general, getting ready for like fantasy football in your managed leagues or maybe any bets you want to get in or DFS play even, like how has this year affected your process? Are there things that you have changed that you think may actually be good for your process moving forward, or is this completely uncharted territory for you?
Definitely uncharted territory. Never been married before. Hopefully I don't get married again. But like the toughest thing is planning large events, the wedding, the honeymoon stuff. It's less time that I've had to study and watch training camp news, all this other stuff like that. So it feels like I've lost something. What that something is, I don't know. But now that like the honeymoon's about going to be over, or we are basically done planning it, all that stuff, I'm starting to get back in that groove. So I got another week and a half of best ball. I think I'm actually in my groove right now. I'm starting to read a little bit more. I got that extra hour, 2 hours a day back. But really just, I think having to plan large things, you just lose out on time. You have to like cancel out something. Something has to go. And I think just whether that's just scrolling on X, or Twitter, whatever it used to be called.
Whatever call it these days, yeah.
Yeah, so I think just losing that hour of just something that I could be doing for fantasy football and stuff is what affected me.
We are live in a Best Ball Mania 4 at this point. Moose, I have the 4th overall pick this afternoon. Pretty sure this is a wide receiver spot for me. Basically, it's Christian McCaffrey or Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill. Those are the 3 guys I typically take in this spot. I expect one of them to go here at number 3. It is CMC. So I do think Tyreek Hill is a really, really, really good play with a lot of upside this season, as is Cooper Kupp. That's why they both go here in the top 4. Yeah. But I tend to be taking Hill over Kupp kind of against ADP here. I actually have Hill projected better this upcoming season. You're our data guru, our model guy. Do you agree with me there? Do you disagree with me? Which one of those guys would you rather have this season?
So I actually disagree with you, and I'm actually taking Kupp over in that situation, mainly because for the Best Ball Mania, I'm playing more towards correlation in those playoff weeks and as a stack. And I feel like the Miami stack is just not as good as Rams. And so that's why I'm normally taking Kupp. But I still look at my exposures, and if I get a little bit too high Kupp, I'm saying, let me draft a couple Tyreeks here just to even it out because I don't want to be overexposed on one player or one side of the stack.
When you go into our ADP tracker and the stack seeker on OccupyFantasy.com, appreciate the assist from you getting those up this season, Moose. You see the Rams are just tremendously easier to pair with Kupp when you go early. it's a lot harder to get the high upside Miami stack. I won't disagree with you there. It's not super likely Jalen Waddle's going to fall to me, and there's no other Miami pass catcher that gets drafted. So if you want to get a double stack with Tua Tagovailoa, for example, like you really don't have a ton of wiggle room here at the top of the board. I think Tyreek is the type of player that you don't necessarily have to stack. I could go with some other options here early and just have Tyreek also as a super high upside player. So those are the things that I'm now weighing as I build some rosters out. I have pretty equal allocation to both of these guys. I feel like when I get, I've been able to get Cup in the spot that CWI Next did here at like the 5-6 spot more. And I kind of like how those rosters have turned out for me. So that's usually when I'm getting my Cup allocation, Moose. But it's a coin flip with these two guys. I'm just going with the side that I think is the slightly better weighted side this season.
Now, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. He went 1-2 here, but have you adjusted your rankings at all for Jamar Chase? I know a lot of takes on Twitter about that. I'm curious what your process is for it.
I haven't tweaked anything on the Bengals on my end. I even drafted T. Higgins and Joe Burrow as a stack with Irv Smith, I think, as a stack last night. Shared that team in our Discord and the Underdog Best Ball channel. If we're going to get a discount on these Bengals players at this point in the summer, Moose, I'm happy to buy into it. If we get closer to the end of the preseason kickoff for week 1 and the news from trusted Bengal reporters comes out that Burrow's behind schedule, they're unsure, if he's going to start in week 1, then obviously I'll feel poorly about it. But all of the reporting in the short term here has been pretty positive. The injury isn't super serious. They're just going to manage his reps and get him ready in time for the season. That is really the one bright spot to having an injury this early, I think, in the summer, is you still have plenty of time to bounce back from it without it really impacting your fantasy performance.
100%. And also, another thing I think about that is, let's say even if it is the worst case scenario and Burrow is out a couple games, whatever, Jamar Chase is the kind of guy that can be the number 1 wide receiver for a team and just gets 10 plus targets a game. A lot of concentration on him, and he still scores very well. So I think this little thing's pretty good that way.
All right. I'm going to do something here that I did do last night. Jonathan Taylor, Moose. He's the cover boy. He's been the most talked about player in the National Football League over the last, we'll call it 16 hours or so.
Yeah.
Demanding a trade from the Indianapolis Colts. Not sure if that's going to materialize. Not sure where he's going to land. I think in our staff chat when we discussed this yesterday, those of us who discussed it, we sort of netted out on this. As long as we can assume wherever Taylor goes, he's still the lead back. This could be a good thing for his fantasy production. He won't be sharing a backfield with a rushing first quarterback, hopefully, in most new scenarios. How do you feel about Jonathan Taylor changing teams?
It's tough. I think we said on the last time here when I mentioned about players who aren't on teams right now, Dalvin Cook, D-Hop, stuff like that. And this almost feels like a similar situation to me. Don't necessarily know where he's going. If you think about it, what good situations fit him, it's kind of low. For round 2, it seems a little iffy. So I would probably back off on him. Maybe round 3, or if he's not falling to round 3 or 4, but that's probably where I would take him. I don't know. It's just one of those things where maybe I'm too conservative about it, but I would be passing on him.
All right. I have been passing on him mostly to this point when I thought he was a lock to be an Indianapolis Colts. So I'm not going to fully disagree with you here. I am going to go with Josh Allen once again. I think I took him on the last stream that I did with Brian. With a start like this, Moose, Josh Allen, a quarterback, Jonathan Taylor maybe with Indianapolis, maybe with somebody else, Tyreek Hill with the Miami Dolphins. I think I got a really good shot here at the number 1 scoring player at each of those 3 positions. I'd be more than happy to start that way every single time.
Oh, absolutely. And then it's one of those things where even if you do get like a minor stack elsewhere, you're going to eventually need a 1-off, 2-off player. You can't draft 18 rounds of the same team. So you're going to need to differentiate somehow. And I like that startup.
I guess just relative to Taylor, we can stay on this subject for a second here. I think the worst case scenario is he stays in Indianapolis and plays out the last year of his deal, tries to improve his value in free agency. I can't imagine that if we get to like kickoff in week 1, he's going to hold out. That would nuke any value that he might be able to earn on the open market. I suppose we've seen stranger things happen, but if he was going around pick 17, 18, the front end here of round 2, we're still getting value here, even on his own team if situation doesn't change. So I still think there's enough upside here, regardless of whether or not his request is honored, is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense. I mean, he has the ability to be where you draft him, and that's why his ADP is there. It just seems one of those. Maybe I'm just again. Maybe it's just one of those. I'm too conservative.
No, I don't have any disagreement with your stance. I think I mentioned on one of the shows with Chuck this week, Moose, that I'm pretty light on my exposure to these second-round running backs. Barkley, Chubb, Pollard, Taylor, Henry to some degree. I have a little bit more of him. I want to make sure that as I get through this next phase of drafting my Best Ball Mania teams, I at least stay in line with the field on exposure to those guys, because I think they all have league-winning upside. And I feel like it would be a mistake for me to get through 100, 150 drafts and only have like 2 to 3% of these guys.
That makes sense. Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah. It's always one of those things where it's like, even if you don't like the player, do you really want to ignore him if you're doing, 100 plus drafts? Maybe you just click him a couple times just for what? Or, well, curious, what are your thoughts on that? Like, there's a lot of like groups of players that are around similar ADP. And we talked about like Cup and Hill. If you're overexposed on some of those guys just because to try and limit your exposure, are you just drafting the other people in that group, or are you still just kind of being overexposed on certain players?
I think I need to force myself to draft the other guys just to have a little bit of a piece. I guess a good example would be where we are right now at running back. We have, let me just make sure I'm looking at who's still available. Breece Hall sliding a little bit with this A, Dalvin Cook rumor, and B, him being on the PUP list. So I'll leave him off for the purpose of the discussion here. But this Jameer Gibbs, Joe Mixon, Ken Walker, as Gibbs comes off the board, Aaron Jones, Alexander Madison group. In my personal rankings, I'm really high in this range on Mixon, Aaron Jones, Madison. So I don't believe I have any yet, for example, of Kenneth Walker or J.K. Dobbins. I feel like this is a practical example of what I was just talking about. If I get to the end of draft season and I don't have either of those two guys, that's probably not good. So I'm trying to make sure that I get at least a haircut of those guys in my rosters. All right, let's reorient ourselves. We're in the 4th round. I've got a Dolphin, someone who might be a Colt, might not be a Colt, and Josh Allen with the Bills. I think Josh Allen's pass catchers are a couple of rounds later than here. At this point, I'm willing. This may be actually a little bit more risky than it seems. I'm willing to catch the falling knife a little bit on Breece Hall.
Okay.
I still think he has better upside than Dalvin Cook, even if Dalvin Cook signs with the New York Jets. I think Dalvin Cook is seen as more of maybe plug in the hole if Breece Hall is out. Breece Hall, tremendous talent in the second year. And we just know what happens with running backs at the macro level, Moose. The younger guys tend to have more tread on the tires, tend to have a higher ceiling with their athletic performance. Obviously, tremendous concern for Hall coming off the ACL, and there's historical trends on players returning from that type of injury and how long it takes them to bounce back. But I'm more worried about, what's Breece Hall going to be like for me in November, December in this contest, not necessarily September. So if I go Taylor and Breece Hall early here, I think I can pretty much just hammer pass catcher for the next few rounds here.
I love that idea. Yeah. Yes. Let's see. And speaking of that, you're on the clock. So who are you thinking about taking next?
Well, let's look at the best available wide receivers. I'm pretty low on DJ Moore this season. So I'm going to go with someone I think has pretty good upside here in Brandon Ayuk with the San Francisco 49ers. Seems to be more of a traditional downfield threat receiver than Deebo Samuel, who they use more as kind of like a Swiss Army knife type player. They try to get Deebo involved in the running game and stuff like that. So like the upside of Ayuk, getting a lot of camp hype. If you read the daily beat reports, which we all do around these parts anyway. So Ayuk is my wide receiver too. The other thing there being like if I waited on receiver again here, I'd probably feel pretty bad about my second and third wide receiver. So happy to plug Ayuk in as wide receiver 2 here and continue to build from there.
Makes sense to me. And speaking of the Swiss Army knife, I was actually having a talk with Waleed, who's another high stakes drafter, and Brian. And my hot take of the season is that Debo Samuel is going to be wide receiver 7 or better this year.
So I was super, super high. I think I was you last year. I was like, I don't get why everybody is fading Debo, Yak Machine. Well, I learned the lesson the hard way. You're telling me you're buying the dip here. He was going pretty high in drafts last year.
Yeah.
Now going around the third, fourth round. You think this price is a little bit better for him, huh? I admittedly, I think he's another player I need to get at least a little bit of. I think I've only taken him like once, if that, so far.
Yeah. I mean, just again, one of those things where we've seen it the last couple of years. We have these like Swiss Army knife style players, and Cordell Patterson's another one that comes to mind. Taysom Hill's another one that comes to mind, where they just find ways to get points. And not to sound, like non-traditional, they got the dog in them. They know how to score, especially when they're getting goal line work. You don't know what they can get. They get points, and that's what shoots you up leaderboards.
I think we might have some regression for Debo, maybe, right? With that efficiency dipping last year,
Yeah.
maybe his average is still higher than everybody else's, so maybe he gets back towards that. Missed some games down the stretch last year due to injury, so I think the mathematical case is there. And I guess it's been a while since you and I, as I see a tweet come along my timeline that Sunday's 49er camp practice was the Brandon Ayuk show. I have to like that today.
Nice.
As you put these takes out into the wild and the group chats, mentioned Waleed, very, very, very good managed league high stakes player. Are your takes largely informed by your early process with getting ready to put out some of our models, or do you just know intuitively based on how you would build the model? Like, I don't know how far along you are yet. That player's going to pop for me, and he's pretty undervalued based off of what I'm seeing.
So I think it's more towards that one where the models haven't been built yet. They'll be starting this week. And it's just, I kind of know what's going to go into it. I kind of have a figure of what people are going to be for week 1, week 2, et cetera. Kind of how the teams are going, what the model is going to look for in a player. And so it's like, oh yeah, I like these, and I know what kind of regressions potentially could happen. And so just that, and then drafting, reading, it's like, yeah, I kind of making some informed decisions based off what I'm reading and what the model would come out with.
So this is officially feeling ugly for me. I don't like what's left at receiver at this point, but I'm going to take a shot on George Pickens, who I think flashed some upside at the end of last season. And if Kenny Pickett plays better in year 2, Pickens probably will obviously be lifted by that. Wide receivers really got hammered here right before I came on the clock here in round 6. So I was kind of hoping one of Deontay, Gabe, or Mike Evans would be there for me. Gabe was the primary target, but didn't get my way here. It is what it is. It's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, I am very overexposed on George Pickens. Just seems he's one of those people that just kind of falls to me, and he's one of the best of that group. And it's like, all right, well, this is what we're doing.
I know your process is heavily quant driven, math driven, and when you get excited when I say I'm going to take a player, that makes me excited that I took that player. So I am happy to have George Pickens on this team.
There we go.
Some correlation with the Seattle Seahawks for Pickens in championship week. So have to keep that in mind here down the stretch with what's available. Quentin Johnston's an interesting player. I've seen people on both sides of the bull and bear case here with him. Moose drafted by the Chargers, probably competing with Joshua Palmer for third wide receiver role, with upside to displace one of Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. Being picked in the 6th, 7th round, it feels expensive to me. How do you feel about players like that with that uncertainty with their roles? Are you willing to take the risk on them, or are you kind of a wait and see approach guy?
So I think this is one of those situations where it's a little bit different than the players who don't have teams. You have a player on a team fighting for a spot. And I think especially early on, you can take these stands and say, hey, I'm going to be overexposed on Quentin Johnston. And if he gets that role, then I'm higher on him than everyone else. And that makes me look great. Granted, there is a downside. If he doesn't get there, then it doesn't work out. But I like taking the risks there. Just I think you have to pick your spots on where you take the risk, and that's one of them.
So I'm reaching a little bit on available wide receivers. I just took Brandon Cooks from the Dallas Cowboys. Okay. I think Brandon Cooks, player that Dallas went out and got deliberately from the Houston Texans this offseason, probably felt like their offense missed something from dumping Amari Cooper in 2022. So now they're going to roll with a wide receiver trio, we think, of CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Michael Gallup. I feel like Cooks immediately slides into that secondary wide receiver role. The only problem here with Dallas Moose is the change at offensive coordinator. This may actually be a slightly more run-heavy team than we have seen in the past, but still very happy to have a player with upside like Cooks on probably one of the better teams, definitely in the NFC, but in the NFL in general.
Yeah. You pretty much spoke every word I would say about Brandon Cooks.
So, wide receivers are just going fast and furious here on Underdog, and it's really not the case on some of the other places you can draft. DraftKings, for example, the most popular one. You tend to see these guys go a little bit later, which I think is interesting in the PPR format. But once again, just to hammer home for the people, I do think it is optimal to get 4 or 5 wide receivers here in the first 7, 8 rounds. So with that macro kind of guiding my process, I am going through my rankings for what's left here and just sort of taking the players I think are the best selections in the range. I deliberately did what a lot of people in the same range here did on Kadarius Toney Moose, and I avoided him. The Chiefs just announced, obviously, just announced, it was in the last week. He had a knee procedure. He's going to miss a little bit of time. His ADP is somewhat all over the place. It was in the late 70s, early 80s. I've seen him slip into the 100s by ADP, which is round 9. I feel like with the Chiefs, obviously, everybody wants a piece of Patrick Mahomes' receiving core. Yeah. But at this point, Toney, I've already got a decent amount of him when we thought he was going to be healthy. So I'm leaning towards taking more of his teammates at this point than taking Kadarius Toney. Just in case you're wondering my thoughts on that player.
No, it makes sense. And I was actually going to pick your brain, like mentally. How do you, when you talked about wide receivers are just flying off the board, when something like that happens, it could be like the quarterbacks are going early, tight ends going, whatever could be happening. How are you kind of just adjusting on the fly of, let's say a bunch of wide receivers are going. So now what's your strategy going to be? Are you just overexposing or like overreaching for the players that you need to get and figure out as draft goes on? Or curious to get your thoughts there.
I think I think I reached a little bit on Cooks here, about 8 or 9 picks too early, but also I like the player and he wasn't going to be there for me at pick 93 because his ADP is well before that. So that's how I like to think about a reach. You can't look at ADP alone in a vacuum. You got to look at where your picks fall when you're making those decisions. Cortland Sutton with the Denver Broncos. I think Sutton and Judy are a very, very strong 1-2 punch in their passing offense, and their ADPs being so far apart has never really made a tremendous amount of sense to me. So in the 8th and 9th round, when Sutton is still there and when I need receivers, I'm more than happy to take them.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, 100%. You explained that very well.
So now that I have 5 receivers through the first 8 rounds, that's a target range I like to have at this point. I'm willing to kind of consider best player available a little bit more. And with a 1-2-5, that's the build I have here: 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 5 wide receivers. Missing on Gabriel Davis. I'm not going to go out of my way to force a stacking partner with Josh Allen, although I do think there are still options available to me to do that. I am thinking a little bit about other stacks on the board I can pull off. Just speaking of, speaking of George Pickens earlier, talked about how Seattle has a week 17 correlation with him. I can take someone who could end up being the highest scoring running back on the Seattle Seahawks in Zach Charbonnet, rookie that they drafted in the 2nd round this past NFL draft. I probably, if I decide to go this route, could take Kenny Pickett as my 2nd quarterback later. And now I've got a really interesting, cheap secondary week, championship week game stack on my lineup.
I love that. I mean, anytime you can stack, we're big fans of stacking here. I'll take it. Yeah. And let's see. Oh,
One of
another thing.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was
No,
gonna say
I had nothing. I was.
since we're in the like the double digit rounds here, it was actually another conversation we had with I was having with Waleed and some other people is when you get in these double digit rounds, generally speaking, you're getting players, you're kind of just hoping that they get some playing time. What's the max amount that you're like capping somebody in these double digit rounds? Like I think Waleed's saying like no more than like 10% of somebody because you're basically having to reach and you're hoping that they can go in. I'm curious to get your thoughts on if you're capping anybody at this round that you really like or what your process is there.
I think one of the things I've been most afraid of is having too much of the same value players in all of my lineups. So I kind of get the 10% number. I'd love to maybe have a conversation with him myself and see if there's any research that's led him specifically to that number. But I think base rates here, if a player has an ADP inside of, let's call it 180, they're being drafted basically every single time in these contests. So 8.3% of the field is going to have them, 1 out of every 12 people, because that's just the way it's going to work in the regular season portion of the contest. A 2x to be double exposed on that would be around 16%. So I feel like that 15 to 20% range is probably the target range I'm looking at. Even if I'm super high on a player, if I have 2 times the field of that player, that's probably enough leverage in this type of format.
I think that's really good. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense there. Yeah.
Unless I would say like we think it's just an absolute mispricing, screaming value that we want to make sure we're super high on. But I don't know that if that fictional player I just created actually exists this season.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I think I would say I didn't play as much best ball last year as I should, but I feel like this season there's been a lot. Like ADP is not necessarily very wide over the place. Seems like ADP is pretty sharp.
I think early in the process here, I talked about some late wide receivers that I loved. Mecole Hardman with the Jets, they're probably their primary slot receiver this season was one of them, and I'm super high on him now, so I'm trying to rein that in and avoid selecting him unless I'm going for a jet stack or something like that. Tank Dell, rookie wide receiver with the Houston Texans, receiver that their rookie quarterback, CJ Stroud, kind of demanded that they draft because he wanted him out there. That was a great indicator to me, like, okay, this player is going to be worth having this year. I've got a decent amount of him. And Richie James with the Kansas City Chiefs, saw what he did with the New York Giants last year. Now gets tied to Patrick Mahomes. His basically free ADP all summer until camps opened never made a ton of sense to me. So those were some of the early guys I was hammering pretty hard. And I hope my allocations, even for those guys, fall into that at least like 2x range. 20% would be about the most I would like to have of those guys when all is said and done here. All right, we are at pick 117. Wide receivers are always like where I'm going to default to mentally here. Although I guess I could. I don't know. I'm about to time out here. We're going to take Juju Smith-Schuster with the Patriots. Reports are that he is having some good camp practices since returning, missed OTAs for them. And in this range, looking at what I had left based off of who's been drafted, Moose, on my own projections that I have available through our Discord for anyone who's curious, only receiver left for me that I think will average over 10 fantasy points a game. So I'm happy to lock that in here in round 10.
Okay, nice. Yeah. Juju. Yeah, I mean, he's shown what he can do. So, I mean, New England's one of those teams where they're a cheap team, and you can kind of get them whenever you need to get them late in the draft. And so, that's actually some of the players that I'm closer to that 10-15% mark in the later rounds that I'm exposed on. So, I'm on board with there.
I think the contract that the Patriots gave Juju Smith-Schuster, the intention is that he's the direct replacement for the Jacoby Myers targets and projection from 2022 in that offense. He was definitely the most attractive passing game weapon worth having a piece of in 2022. So it stands to reason that Juju is going to be that guy here in 2023 for New England.
Makes sense to me. Perfect.
And he correlates with Josh Allen. That's a championship week game, the Bills and the Patriots. I do think going through the rest of this draft, even though missing on the early wide receivers that would have been best to pair with Allen. I think that I cannot allow myself to not get at least some kind of exposure. So this may be a reach, but thinking about when your next pick falls, Dalton Kincaid, rookie tight end for the Bills, who they traded up for this past spring, not going to make it back to me in round 12 the most of the time based off of where his ADP falls. He is pick 131 here on Underdog right now. We're at pick 124 here, so it's not an outrageous reach, but I am going to lock him in here as my first piece to pair with Josh Allen on this roster.
Okay, I dig it. Yeah, and I would almost say that, and I don't have the math to back it up with me right now, but I feel like that tight end quarterback correlation in best ball works, especially if for the mid tier tight ends, deep rounds. I'd rather have my quarterback with that tight end as opposed to I'm okay going Lamar and Mark Andrews, but Mark Andrews can survive by himself. Dalton can do that as well.
I think the best way if the bull case for this player pans out, the best way to get him is when you have him paired with Josh Allen. I think we're aligned there. Feels like standalone wise here in round 11, it's still kind of expensive for a tight end when you look at what's still available at the very end of these contests. So I much prefer taking guys like Kincaid, who else is here? Evan Engram may have already gone. David Njoku went the round before here. I prefer getting those guys with their quarterbacks when I can.
100%. Yep. Perfect.
So, what can I ask you? You've been doing a few of these drafts. You mentioned New England being the players that you have 10 to 15% of. Who are some players that you find yourself clicking on in these ranges more so than others? I feel like I've had those conversations with your brother Brian, with Chuck on here, but I don't know if I've had the opportunity to ask you what are the value plays that you think are best this year?
So I don't necessarily know if they're value plays, but they're players that I keep clicking on. And the ones that keep showing up is some of the Kansas City guys. So MVS, I own him. Shaheed for New Orleans, I own him. Those are some of my two highest in this late round range. It's weird. I know what they're capable of. So it's one of those things is I know what they can do, and comparing to the people around them at ADP, can those players also do that? Not entirely convinced, so I'm clicking on them a lot more. And I don't know if that's the right approach or not, but that's the approach I'm taking.
Well, it makes enough sense to me because I'm always looking at how I have someone ranked for a median fantasy point production, and right off the top of the board here at receiver, I've got Rondale Moore, Van Jefferson around 8 points. I've got a player like Jonathan Mingo with the Carolina Panthers around 5 points. So, without weighing my exposures at all, I would always take those other two guys over Jonathan Mingo, or Adam Thielen, who I also have around 8 points per game on average. I would pretty much always take Adam Thielen over Jonathan Mingo. Maybe that's correct, but I know enough to know that I'm not as good at projecting as I probably think I am. So I probably do need to take Mingo at least a little bit, not having exposure to any of these guys when I'm drafting at the volume that I'm drafting, which, I'm hoping to get 100 to 150 teams in this contest. Feels like it would be wrong in this particular type of contest. If you're more casual, you're drafting 1 team, 3 teams, 10 teams in that range. Yeah, obviously hone in on the guys that you think are best. But now that I'm at the point where I want to diversify a little bit more, that's how I'm kind of thinking about things here. Pick 141.
And you did talk about Mingo, right?
I did, but I'm going to do something a little weird here. I'm going to take Gerald Everett, and I'm going to have 2 somewhat early tight ends on this roster. You might say to yourself, what reason on this godforsaken earth does Chris have to take Gerald Everett with the roster that he's been building? Well, the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers have a Week 17 matchup, so I've got another mini correlation in Championship Week. If I am lucky enough to advance to the finals, I like having that on this team.
Hey, it's always those little mini correlations that you never really think about, and so, I mean, especially Championship Week, I like it.
right. And we're going to be on the clock again really quickly here, so I'm just making sure I stay on top of things. Did mention Mingo. Maybe he'll still be here. Adam Thielen will still be here. Moose, I'm willing to fade my own projection a little bit. Mentioned Van Jefferson and having him at around 8 fantasy points per game on average. But honestly, like I don't think Van Jefferson is that good. So even when he's available, I'm not like fired up to click on Van Jefferson. I feel like with the Rams, all things considered, all things being equal, when everybody's healthy, it's Cooper Kupp, it's Tyler Higbee by a long shot as far as preferences go in that offense. Do you? I guess I'm allowing myself to be biased by my perception of the players. Where do you land on stuff like that? Do you try to let that stuff go and just be fully math based, or do you put your? I mean, I know you're a Bengals fan, so putting that aside for a second, are you willing to put stuff like that aside and just go with the math more often, or do you weigh those personal reads from time to time?
I definitely weigh some personal reads from time to time. I try and stick back from the math. I think what I also do is I take a look back at the draft board after I'm done, but not like right after I'm done, maybe like 5-10 minutes, so I have a clearer mind, and I'll go and I'll say, did I really need to take this person in this round or whatnot, and think. And so it's trying to find like the personal biases that I wasn't even thinking about at first. And so it's like, okay, so I picked this guy because why? Oh, because I wanted to pick him, or because the math base. And that kind of getting that mindset, kind of helps me realize that I should be taking some guys at certain times, or I should be taking guys at certain times. So I know I kind of swayed from the answer, but yeah, so I do have some personal biases, but I'm trying
as we all do.
Yeah, but I'm trying.
We all definitely do. I can tell you that I have gotten, this is my 46th team in the contest at this point. I've probably maximized my biases, right? I've gotten to the point where I've taken those guys enough in each of these different ranges from different pick slots where I'm just trying to force myself to go against the bias at this point.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably fair for most people who end up mass multi-entering any kind of contest. Once you've got the allocation to the guys that you really want, that you kind of feel good about, I think that's when you can start layering in everybody else. So that's sort of, I guess, the point in my process that I'm at. That's the very unique thing I will say about building out like 150 in this type of contest. You know, this isn't like a daily fantasy slate where you're crunching the lineups in a builder, right? And you're uploading them and they're all running in the contest at the exact same time. Your allocations are shifting as you sit down and physically do a contest one by one. So it's just a completely different way to approach, you know, how to make sure I guess the approach you need to smooth out your exposure is way different than when you're clicking through building through crunches in the builder.
It's definitely weird because it's like, because again, when you're drafting a lot, you're saying, oh, I drafted Mingo in 4 straight drafts and he still comes up, and it's like, do I take him? It's like, you're purposely just saying no, or because you need to just limit your exposure. And so it's definitely interesting how exposures change through each draft and how you need to constantly manage them. So I'm jealous that you're doing 100, 150. I don't know how you're doing that one.
I'm trying at this point. I've said 1 per day. I feel like we're still early enough in the process where if I do at least that, I'll get pretty close to my target number here. But I think obviously I'm probably going to have to ramp that up and do like maybe 2 or 3 as things chug along here. Will be super interesting as I'm juggling that and getting ready for preseason stuff. Can't get out of here, Moose, without talking about, see, my son's excited about it, preseason football starting next week, Browns and Jets on Thursday night, the Hall of Fame game. Should be a good time for all who are looking forward to that. Moose, I do want to target Kenny Pickett as my second quarterback, but I think I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk on waiting for him to come back to me. So I'm going to take Curtis Samuel with your hometown Washington Commanders as my 7th wide receiver on this team, about 9 picks ahead of ADP. Samuel, a player I'm pretty high on. I have him around 9 fantasy points per game on average, ahead of anybody else that's still available on the board at this point. So when that happens, that's when I'm happy to take him.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know how much your following like the Commanders with the team change or the owner change, but it seems like players are liking it. Fans are absolutely loving it. The whole vibe that I'm getting here is let's go Commanders. We want to play and we actually want to play and win. And so a little bit higher on Commanders the last week or two. So
I think Curtis Samuel, this is an outrageous endorsement of his skills, is a Debo Samuel light. Like the way that he's used on the football field. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football, but we've seen him be used creatively out of the backfield before by different offensive coordinators and coaching staffs. Mm-hmm. And I feel like even with the very talented tailbacks that they have on the Commander roster, Samuel will still have a role like that. So that is a pretty big reason why I'm super high on him here. I think this is kind of a weird move, and I don't know how many people are going to be doing it. I'm going to actually see if I can get away with waiting one more round on a quarterback. And Moose, I'm going to take the absolutely, maybe this is so bad it's good approach of drafting both of Josh Allen's tight ends, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. And that's going to be my Josh Allen double stack on this team.
So I've made the case before where if it's a backfield or tight end route, whatnot, I could see the case of you cannibalize, you get all of them. So if whoever's the star back for that week gets it, especially in these late rounds. It's one of those things where it's pretty gross, but for tight end, I could see it work. Tight end's a very top high position. You have your 2 to 3 elites, a couple middles, and then everyone else is kind of trash. And so after that, for tight end, I could see that working. You know you're going to get all the tight end points, and all you need is one of them to squeak through the other tight end, and it works out. So I like it.
I will be honest, as soon as I did not get Gabriel Davis to pair with Josh Allen, wasn't feeling super great about this roster here, Moose. I have a 1-4-7-3 now. I'm trying to make sure I'm maximizing the upside with Josh Allen. I kind of feel like this roster is kind of dead already. I don't love the way look, maybe it's not. Maybe it'll end up being one of the best teams that I have. But one of the reasons I was fine with going Knox here in the 15th round is I don't feel like I need to prioritize much else. I like the running backs I got early. I like the 7 wide receivers that I have. So I don't feel like I'm passing up on something that I absolutely need to have to get Dawson Knox in addition to Dalton Kincaid here. Little bit of a unique combination with Josh Allen. If I'm able to sneak this through, maybe I'll be the only one in the finals that has that duo. Maybe they both catch a couple of touchdown passes and the wide receivers for Buffalo dud in the finals, and I'm the happiest person in the contest. So that's the type of thing we have to think about when we're getting ready for a contest against 600,000 people fighting to be in that final round of 400 or so people, all trying to win the $3 million prize.
Yeah, and then that's when both tight ends scored 3 touchdowns, and you have the tight end and the flex, and you're good.
Probably going to take some shots on running backs that are, I like to call them lottery tickets here at the end of the draft. I do think they exist. I've asked every co-host on this panel of ours how they feel about the backup running backs on the Las Vegas Raiders due to the Josh Jacobs holdout. So I'll ask you as the math guy. Zamir White with the Las Vegas Raiders. They drafted him in 2022. Didn't have a ton of touches last season because they basically all went to Josh Jacobs. Yeah. If you go and you build a model for week 1 DFS, and we know Josh Jacobs is not playing for the Las Vegas Raiders, I'll put it this way. I feel like if Jacobs was playing, based off of what we've seen that coaching staff do with their running back, Jacobs would be a pretty highly ranked play in our model. Where would Zamir White fall, knowing Josh Jacobs is likely to be out for you?
So he's like 5,000, 4,900, something like that. Mm-hmm. I would probably say if he's out, and don't clip me if I said probably top 5 running back in the model at his price.
We get off the rip a top 5 running back under $5,000 on DraftKings for Daily Fantasy. We can get him in the 16th, 17th round here on Underdog. I mean, you're talking me into selecting him here. I need my second quarterback, so I am going to take Kenny Pickett, pair him with George Pickens, have a bring back with Zach Charbonnet. Feel like I've got a good secondary stack there. We gassed him up too hard. Zamir White, this is right around his ADP, so that's when he should go anyway, Moose. But I agree with you. I think provided the Raiders don't sign anybody else, which I think is a real risk, Zamir White is going to be a really, really strong play if they're unable to come to terms with Josh Jacobs. And it does feel like, if you're setting odds on it, it feels like more likely than not that they're not going to come to terms here.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well.
All right. This is a great range in general to take if you're able to build a team different than how I built a team tonight or today, and you can wait for tight end in the last 3 rounds. I think it's a really, really strong way to build a roster in general, because if you look at these players going in round 16 or later, Moose, we're taking some pretty disgusting wide receivers and running backs, yet there are still starting tight ends available. So, that's definitely just something big picture, macro-wise to keep in mind. I feel like the available tight ends are well worth prioritizing here. Chase Brown, back up to Joe Mixon. Come on down. Running back number 5 on the roster. Already have 3 tight ends, have 7 wide receivers I feel pretty good about. I can go into the final pick here at either running back or wide receiver and feel pretty good no matter what falls to me. So that's why I'll take Chase Brown here, who I think is one of those lottery tickets who has upside if anything happens to Mixon.
Yeah, I think that's perfect there. And you're not wrong about the amount of gross players in this. And it reminds me of like managed leagues where people draft the top defense like 5 rounds too early, and it's like, well, you could just got starting defense the last round, and and so you can, if you can wait for tight ends. I mean, if you can select a starter in the last round of any draft, you should do that.
You see where I took Kenny Pickett here. Some of these backup quarterbacks that are available. A lot of owners taking their second or third quarterback at this point around pick 200. Like quarterback, your second quarterback, and your tight ends, you can get those players super late. I think big picture, that's something to keep in mind. I wouldn't, unless you're doing something a little weird like I did today on a team that I don't really like that much. I will be flat out honest on that. That's, I think, the better way to draft a team in general is to wait for your second quarterback and a couple of tight ends here in the last few rounds. So as it comes back to me, I'm just keeping one eye on what is left. There's not really any wide receivers I'm like super excited about left. Maybe I would have reached for a Kansas City Chief, but they seem to have gone. Justin Ross went right before my Chase Brown pick. Justin Ross, a really sick highlight from Chiefs training camp moves of him running a route and literally like taking the towel around his waistband and drying his hands off while he's running to get ready to catch the football and pulling it off. I don't know how that translates to being ready to get real snaps in like, actual like regular season NFL games, but it certainly looks really cool. And it seems like Justin Ross's ADP is now rising because of it. I think, Tank Dell, someone I mentioned earlier with Houston, I do like him a little bit if he's still here. I mentioned his name, so maybe he'll get selected. Some of the recent reporting out of New England Patriots camp, I guess, as we close the show out here, it seems like Mike Gesicki is not having a strong camp. It's early, but a lot of positive buzz thus far about Hunter Henry, who just came off the board, and his rapport with Mac Jones. Feels like that's one of the better values here, speaking about late tight ends. All right. We are going to close out the show with a second wide receiver to pair with Kenny Pickett. I didn't forget about my second quarterback. I've now got George Pickens and Allen Robinson to pair with Kenny Pickett. With Josh Allen, even though it's a little weird, I have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. So I love having double stacks with my quarterbacks. A decent 2-5-8-3 build. This is right around something I'm always looking to target on my rosters that I build out. That's the team we put together on the show here, Moose. Appreciate you joining me as always. Well, not as always. I appreciate doing these streams as always. I appreciate guests when they join me, being available to sub in last minute, hold your own conversation for about 45 minutes to an hour, Moose. Is there anything that you want to share with our viewers, either live or running this back later before we get out of here this afternoon?
If you know how I can do DraftKings or bet on sports in Asia and Korea, please let me know. My DMs are open.
All right, Moose. Good luck and have a great time on your trip abroad. We're looking forward to all the stories you bring back that you will share both offline and online with the people here. Promo code Occupy. You can sign up for Underdog if you have not yet and get up to a 100%, up to a $100 match on your first $100 deposit. So they'll give you $200 to start playing different contests here on Underdog, like Best Ball Mania 4, like the Slow Puppy, some slow drafts for just $5 here. If you're into NFL best ball, there's some NBA contests out. There's pick'em slips you can put through for stat lines as well, if that's your type of thing here on Underdog. We've got a very, very active Discord discussing the best way to attack a bunch of these different contests. So definitely worth considering. We will be back next week, not just for some more best ball NFL streams, Moose, but to talk about the Hall of Fame game. The very first NFL game of the 2023 season is here. We made it. We survived. That's going to do it for this stream today. Appreciate you joining me, Moose, and everybody else. We will talk to you next time.
Have a good night, everyone.